PFR Nation, welcome to episode 101. We're doing 100 episodes, 100 lessons. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, if you missed episode 100, we covered episodes 1 through 25. I went through all of the podcast episodes from this Planning for Retirement podcast, and I talked about one key takeaway from each of those episodes. Today, we're doing part 2. We're going to be doing episodes 26 through 50, and then we have 2 more parts coming out, 51 through 75, and then 76 through episode 100. Most of the episodes are very self-explanatory, but sometimes I'll read out the episode and I'll talk a little about the background of what we covered and why. And then, of course, we'll get to that key takeaway for those episodes. So super excited to dive into episodes 26 through 50 today. But before we jump in, a little public service announcement here. For all of you listening, it's very likely that you're in your 50s, 60s, or 70s. And it's very likely that you have aging parents, and those parents are in their late 70s or 80s or even 90s. And it's also likely, if they are high net worth individuals, that they could be subject to financial predators. Okay. I'm talking about individuals that call themselves financial professionals or financial advisors that are really in it for themselves. They're selling products to make a big commission, and an easy commission is selling annuities to seniors. We're in fall review season, and we're meeting with all of our clients that, in our business, and we're talking about tax projections and what's going on in their lives. And that kind of dovetailed into a conversation about inheritance and how one of their parents, the dad, is 88 years old, and he's going through decline in health, and it's likely he's a high net worth individual that our clients are going to be inheriting some assets. So we talked about the tax implications of the 10-year rule on IRAs versus stretch IRAs. We talked about the tax impact of brokerage accounts and real estate inheriting. But that also led to a conversation where they literally saved the dad from putting a large sum of money into a fixed annuity at 88 years old. This person, the father, had a substantial sum of money in the bank in CDs, cash accounts. I mean, he's 88 years old. He doesn't need to take on a lot of risk, nor did he want to. But because of the sums of money he had, he naturally was led over into the private wealth division of this bank. And then this individual who called himself a financial advisor, even called himself a fiduciary, by the way, which makes me sick to my stomach, but basically talked him into purchasing an annuity. And thankfully, our clients are involved in the financial decision making, and they found out about this, and he was still in the free look period, in that grace period where they could still cancel that annuity contract. And thankfully they did that, because this person was really pushing back, really pushing back hard, saying that the dad agreed to this, he already signed off, this is what he wants, and basically also lied to our clients, saying that the grace period was over. He said the grace period was 10 days and the grace period was in fact 30 days. So thankfully they were able to get out of that contract. But I bring this up because these things happen all the time. High net worth seniors, elderly seniors are perfect targets for these financial predators. And if you are listening to this podcast and you're any way involved in mom or dad's financial affairs, just make sure they're protected from these predators out there, because these people are not fiduciaries. They're not financial advisors. They are salespeople, and they are trying to extract the most amount of commissions out of your account, out of their account, into their pocket. And they don't care about the repercussions. They don't care of the negative impact that might have on the client. They only care about themselves. Unfortunately, there's bad actors in every industry. Our industry is no different. And so this is my public service announcement that these types of things happen all the time. I think back to this story back in the day. I was working with a client who also who had early onset dementia, and thankfully we caught it, we recognized it, and we had the daughter involved in all of our review meetings. So she was sitting in all of our review meetings, and that was great until I get a phone call from our home office saying, "Oh, hey, Kevin, by the way, Mrs. Klein is rolling her entire IRA over into this annuity. Just wanted to give you a heads up." And I thought, what is going on? I called the client. She didn't even remember signing any documents. She didn't even remember this. Okay. Obviously she had dementia. So I called the daughter, and the daughter was furious. Thankfully, she was able to cancel that contract before the free look was up. But these things happen all the time, unfortunately. And so if you are financially savvy and you are in charge of, or potentially involved with in any way, decisions for mom or dad, just make sure they steer clear of these financial predators. That's my public service announcement. All right, let's jump into this episode. By the way, this episode is coming out on a very special day, October 28th. That is yours truly. I don't even know what I'm saying here. It's my birthday. So, I don't know how often a podcast will come out on my birthday. So I'm going to announce it to the audience out here. So today is my birthday. It's a special one. It is my last birthday in my 30s. You know what? I'm not one of those people that get super depressed, with getting older. I've got a friend, near and dear friend, a friend of mine who I love to death, but he gets so depressed every birthday because he's like, oh, I'm thinking about getting older and getting frail and then my parents getting older. I'm not like that. Thankfully, I don't have that kind of mindset. I actually look at it each age. This is what my mom told me, is that every age, every period of time, every life phase has its blessings and has their blessings. And so, yes, what it's like to be young in your teens or 20s or early 30s. I'm embracing entering into my 40s. I'm embracing it. I'm excited about it, frankly, and bring it on. So anyways, happy birthday to myself and happy birthday to all of you who maybe share my birthday or maybe have October birthdays, because October, we all know, is the best month of the year. So, all right. With that being said, why don't we jump into the episode? Number 26, 7 reasons to own permanent life insurance. Okay. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I started my career working for one of the big 4 mutual companies that primarily sold life insurance. And, say whatever you want about life insurance. Okay. But, for the right person, for the right situation, it is potentially a good solution. With that being said, 9 times out of 10, these products are improperly sold. And I say this with a lot of confidence because I worked amongst individuals that improperly sold these permanent life insurance products. So 9 times out of 10, they're improperly sold. But let's talk about for retirement planning. Okay. Let's kind of hone in on this. I think the default assumption is, when I get to financial independence, when I hit my financial independence number, I'm going to be financially independent. So if I die, my mortgages may be paid off, or my spouse can use the assets to essentially self-insure. I don't disagree with any of that. I completely agree. When you're young, like for me, I've got a mortgage. I have a pretty large mortgage and I have 3 young kids. My spouse stays at home with my kids. We've got private school. Our overhead is high. If I pass away, my spouse needs a large life insurance policy, and I have multiple life insurance policies that I'm going to keep for many, many years. Okay. So that's kind of your traditional need for life insurance. So when you get to retirement and you're financially independent, why would anyone need or want life insurance? Okay. Let me tell you why. Sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes one of the primary goals for the folks that we serve is to leave a financial legacy to their loved ones, whether it's adult children or maybe grandchildren, whatever that might be. And because of how important that goal is, because of where they're prioritizing that, maybe it's not number 1, but maybe it's a close second. Maybe it's, yes, they want to travel and enjoy their lifestyle, but they also want to preserve most of their principal to leave to the next generation. They worked hard to get to $3 million or $4 million. They don't want to see that deplete all the way down to $1 million or $500,000 when they die. So what does that result in? It results in fear of spending or potentially reluctance of spending because legacy is so important. So what I'd say about this one is it's not about needing life insurance in retirement. It's about what life insurance could potentially do in terms of freeing you up to spend your own nest egg, knowing that your legacy goals, maybe not all of them, but maybe a baseline of your legacy goals are funded through a permanent life insurance policy. I see it firsthand. I've got several clients that have permanent life policies that are adequate sums of money. I promise you, they are more comfortable spending down their portfolio. They're more comfortable when the markets are volatile because they know that, you know what? This is for us. We're spending this down anyways. We still have this $1 million life insurance policy that's going to pass to our beneficiaries. The freedom that gives retirees to spend money for those who believe that legacy is important to them, I believe that is why you may want to consider owning permanent life insurance in retirement. Okay. Now this dovetails into number 27, which is what type of permanent life insurance should I own? So not all permanent life insurances policies are created equally. Okay. It depends on what you value. Some policies put more of a premium on the death benefit. Some policies put more premium on the cash value. Okay. Some policies even have a hybrid long-term care benefit built into them, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So I guess what I'd say is not all permanent life insurance policies are created equally. And what I'd highly recommend you do if you're considering one of these policies is also consult with someone who's a non-biased party to the transaction. And I say that because, sure, your agent might be a very honest individual. Okay. However, it is easy to manipulate these policies on the back end without the client knowing what's going on to increase the commission that's paid to the agent and reduce the amount of value that's provided to the end consumer. So if at all possible, I know it's tough to do. We have solutions for this, by the way. Frankly, we help our clients with these decisions. We don't sell insurance, but I think my background with knowing how life insurance works and how it fits into the plan, we're happy to go through that process with our clients to make sure that they're buying the right product and they're not being taken advantage of. Number 28, the top estate planning concern leading DIY investors to hire our firm. So let me first tell you what it is. Okay. So actually, let me give you the backdrop. So opposites attract in a marriage, typically. Okay. And my marriage is no different. A lot of the clients that we serve, it's the same kind of thing. And generally speaking, because of this fact, you have kind of a CFO and you have a non-CFO spouse. And so the folks we serve, generally speaking, they're in their late 50s and their 60s and the 70s, and they're in good health. Okay. However, they see friends passing away, family members passing away, getting sick, becoming frail, diminished capacity cognitively. And the question they ask themselves is, if something happened to me, if I'm the CFO, if something happened to me as the CFO, how is the non-CFO, how is my spouse feeling about handling this? Meaning, I might have a really good handle on all the spreadsheets and all the complexities with my financial plan, my retirement decisions, and my investment strategy and my tax planning strategy, my Roth conversion strategy. But it's not about you in this situation. Let's say you're gone, or let's say you're incapacitated. Now the non-CFO steps in. How are they feeling about that? And that question oftentimes leads DIY investors to hire our firm or an advisor that they like and trust. They know, like, and trust. And we just got an inquiry from a prospective client who's a podcast listener. And literally that is their main concern is they're CPAs. Okay. They know how to handle all the things that we're talking about. Maybe not to the same degree. They're not doing personal financial planning, but I think they've got a pretty good handle on what's going on just based on some of the information they've shared with us in the retirement readiness questionnaire. But his goal is to make sure his spouse has a plan for life, because he knows that it's more than likely, his spouse is going to outlive him. And he wants to make sure that, he doesn't have to worry about these decisions when he's retired, and he can go enjoy retirement and do the things he wants to do when he wants to do them, and not having these financial decisions be a burden on him. But more importantly, he wants to make sure his spouse is taken care of. So I would say that is the top reason sophisticated or somewhat sophisticated DIY investors hire us, is to make sure that they have a plan for incapacity. Number 29 is the 60-40 portfolio dead for retirement planning. So 60-40 meaning 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. And for years, even decades, I would say that the 60-40 portfolio has kind of been the tried and true portfolio for retirees, but not only retirees, but also endowments and foundations. It's the perfect blend of you've got enough stock exposure to participate in the upside and hedge against inflation, but then the 40% in fixed income provides that income, those stable cash flows, and even price protection if and when stocks fall. But I published this particular episode in late 2023 off the heels of bonds having a terrible year the same year stocks had a terrible year in 2022. So 60-40 portfolios were not saved like they were in the lost decade in the 2000s, like they were in 2008, 2009. 60-40 portfolios were demolished in 2022. Okay. And so there were so many articles that were published in 2023 saying this exact thing. Is the 60-40 portfolio dead, or don't follow the 60-40 portfolio? And my message was simply that it's not dead. Bonds will make a comeback. Okay. I even did an episode earlier this year, and the episode was called Bullish on Bonds, which, by the way, spoiler alert, bonds are up 7.34%. BND, which is one of the core bonds that we use in our portfolios, which is the Vanguard Total Bond Fund, it's positive 7.34% year to date. Not too shabby. My point, though, is that the 60-40 portfolio is not dead. Okay. However, what I will say to this is Bill Bengen, his famous 4% rule, the Trinity study, he used 50-50 as an allocation, 50% stocks, 50% bonds as his baseline. but he suggested getting as close as you can from a risk tolerance standpoint to 75% stocks that you're comfortable with. And I like this. I agree with that. So I would say that retirees retiring today are probably going to be skewing a little bit closer to the 75-25 than they are to 60-40, simply because they're kind of seeing the story play out with bonds. They're seeing longevity play even more of a factor and inflation playing more of a factor. So I would say if you're approaching retirement today and you have a higher allocations to stocks, that's okay. You just need to make sure that the percentage you have in fixed income can hedge against a downturn in stocks. Meaning, let's say you have $1 million portfolio and you have a 75-25 blend, meaning $250,000 is in bonds. Let's say you're pulling $60,000 a year on average from the portfolio during that period of time. That's about 4 years of your cash flow needs in bonds. Not terrible. The Great Recession took about 5.5 years to fully recover. So you're almost there for a Great Recession type event. But for most bear markets that last about a year, you're good. You've got 4 years of fixed income in bonds with the 75-25 portfolio. So I would say, look at how much income you need from the portfolio and then back into the number of years you want to have in either bonds or short-term bonds or even cash equivalents. And that could help drive what allocation makes sense to you. But my point in this one is the 60-40 portfolio is not dead. And I expect bonds to continue a pretty nice run for several years going forward. Don't quote me on that one, though. Number 30, is it harder to go from spender to saver pre-retirement or saver to spender in retirement? Okay, I'm going to read that again because it's a little bit hard. Is it harder to go from a spender to a saver before you retire or to go from a saver to a spender in retirement? And I had my good friend Cody Garrett join me on this one. We've had countless conversations. We were in a study group together for a while, and we had countless conversations about this dynamic of going from a saver into a spender. And I think it is a very difficult thing. Okay. It is a thing. And obviously I've never experienced it personally. I've never gone into retirement. But it is a thing because I've now helped clients retire for 18 years, and it is a thing. And especially for folks that are very frugal and they've kind of spent their whole careers really saving a high percentage of their income, and therefore they're almost overfunded for retirement. And then they get to retirement and they have the capacity to spend $300 or $400 or even $500,000 a year from their portfolio, but they're only spending 25% of that or 10% of that even. Okay. So what is this dynamic? And I would just say it's my takeaway from this is it is a thing to wrestle with. But what I would also say is it's okay if you're doing the things you want to do when you want to do them. There's no harm in not spending what you have the capacity to spend. But what I would say is maybe kind of think through some of your goals and almost kind of reprioritize some of your goals. Maybe it's not spending on a lavish lifestyle, but maybe you have adult children or grandchildren that you plan to leave your money to. And so maybe it's kind of thinking about this concept of gifting with a warm hand versus a cold one. It doesn't have to just be spending the money, but it could be just simply taking the money out of your portfolio and putting it in the hands of individuals that are going to benefit from your inheritance anyways, and doing it when money has more utility. Will your children benefit more from your inheritance when they're 70 or when they're 45? I'll let you answer that question. Number 31, non-traditional retirement planning using real estate, tax planning, and end of year charitable gifting opportunities. So this one I had Brady Slack, who's a CPA on the West Coast, had him on this to talk about real estate. I think really the reason I wanted to do this was, number one, I was on his podcast, but number two, I would say real estate looked like it was so easy for quite a while. You know, you kind of think back 2015, 2016, 2017, interest rates were super low. Then we had the pandemic happen and interest rates were cut again. And then the real estate boom in the US with prices just going through the roof and all these institutional investors transitioning into buying residential homes. And you're in a bidding war, but you're not even bidding against another family. You're bidding against BlackRock. Like these things were so popular for a number of years. And I think the reason I wanted to have Brady Slack on is because I just wanted to confirm, like, real estate, it is a great asset class. Okay. I own real estate. That's part of my investment portfolio, but it's not a passive investment. Okay. It is active. If you can leverage it as part of your portfolio, great. But just know, don't have the wrong expectations. Don't just assume low interest rates are going to be going on forever. Don't just assume price appreciation is going to go on forever like it did post 2020. You're going to go through bumps and bruises. You're going to go through ups and downs in prices. You're going to go through ups and downs with interest rates. You're going to have vacancy. You're going to have repairs. You're going to have maintenance. You're going to have nightmare tenants. All of the things that you think are things with real estate. And so I would say is use caution and have the right expectations if you're using real estate as part of your plan. More often than not, I see people that are retiring that want to get out of real estate and divest their real estate positions rather than add real estate as part of their retirement income plan if they hadn't been using real estate before. So that kind of just tells you a little bit of something, is that folks that have had experience with real estate, they want to simplify their life and therefore they want to divest and reinvest. Whereas folks that have not had experience, they think real estate is their answer to all their solutions, or maybe that's the answer to them being underfunded for retirement. So they have more of a proclivity to add real estate, but that may not be best for your retirement plan. Number 32, tactical ways to reduce your anxiety transitioning from saving to spending in retirement. Love this one because this was simply that follow-up to episode 30 with Cody Garrett. And so this one is a tough thing because, like I said, if you have the capacity to spend $300,000, but you're only spending $100,000, okay, do you take $300,000 out of your portfolio just because you can? Like, sure, you could do that. Obviously, you might be paying more in taxes if you do that. But I think my message here is you can absolutely create these things. You can put these things in place that I talked about in this episode. So go back and listen to it. I mean, I talked about annuitization. I talked about creating a retirement paycheck, but you can't really force people to spend it. This is kind of what I was just mentioning in the episode 30 takeaway. You can't force people to spend it. But I think these types of individuals need to really think through the purpose of their funds. I think oftentimes these really good savers, their sole purpose was to achieve financial independence and not have to work at some point in time. Once they've achieved that, they need, and then they kind of realize based on the math, like they're never going to spend all of this money. They're not even going to come close to spending all this money that they've saved by default of not spending and being a really good saver. So I think these individuals can really benefit from the exercise, just thinking about what the purpose of their funds are, not only during their lifetime, but also at death. And I think this could definitely kind of at least spark the conversation. I think charitable is an easy one to point to, with the clients that we serve, because we have a lot of clients that are fortunate to be in the situation where, maybe it's by being great savers, or maybe it's just because of the market they were fortunate to be in a bull run for many years, or maybe they received an inheritance from their parents. And, they're in this situation where they're going to underspend in retirement. But I think thinking about purpose, it oftentimes leads to more gifting during lifetime. And I think that's what we just talked about with this episode 30 is giving with a warm hand versus a cold one. And just kind of thinking when money has the most important value or utility to your beneficiaries, that's probably when you want to think about putting the money in their hands, as long as they're good stewards of those dollars. But you can't force anyone to spend it. And this is kind of my realization today, 2 years later after this episode, is like, I think we're so gung-ho and so excited, like, oh, our clients have this much more capacity to spend, so let's do it. But if they can do what they want to do when they want to do it, and they don't desire anything, like, who am I to say, do this or go fly first class? Like, of course, like that's an option, but maybe that doesn't provide value to them. So I think thinking about what is going to provide value to them and fulfillment and utility with their money, what the purpose of their money is super important to think through when you're in that situation. Number 3, the title of this one was My Sincere Gratitude, plus a few tax planning observations as we close out 2023. I didn't really, this one was a weird one because it was kind of like a fluffy episode, to be truthful with you. But I would say, kind of looking back on this one, 2023 was a big year for my family and us for personally as well, because that was the end of 2023 was when we decided to move from Florida to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where my wife is from. And, I think my takeaway here is that from this episode, yes, a lot of things, a lot of changes were going on with my family, but we also talked about this major, some major tax planning opportunities at the end of 2023. I feel like this is really when we started to dial in the tax planning with our clients and like the value we can provide from a tax planning standpoint, and sort of this realization that, our clients are looking for someone to actually provide tax strategy, not just file the return, but provide tax strategy. And, oftentimes, when they're paying their CPA or they're paying their tax preparer, that's what they're getting their return filed, and it's fine. But if they go and ask, hey, what makes sense for Roth conversions, or what about tax loss harvesting, or what about optimizing Social Security taxation, or what about optimizing the IRMA brackets to make sure we don't cross over different IRMA thresholds. This is what a really comprehensive retirement planner should be providing. And I think my biggest takeaway in all of 2023 with regards to these life changes and changes within our business is that our clients don't want to overpay the IRS. And every dollar that they save legally, they can spend more on experiences. They can leave more to their family. They can gift more to their family. They can gift more to charity. And I think really doubling down on that idea into 2024 as really and 2025 has paid massive dividends for the families that we serve. All right, episode 34, top investment mistakes retirees have made since 2020. This one really has stemmed, and I've done several episodes on this before, but the Dalbar study, which is third-party research arm that tracks returns of major indices relative to returns of different investments, ETFs, mutual funds. And the conclusion, which I have a healthy dose of skepticism against, I don't think this is as big of a gap as what the Dalbar study is leading us to believe. But this is what they claim, is that they say about, long run equities have returned about 10%. But investors in those equity funds have returned personally closer to 6% or even less. And the gap that they're trying to point out is that it's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. So that was really the baseline of this episode, and really a lot of what we do for our clients, truthfully, from a behavioral finance standpoint, is kind of removing behavior from the equation of investment decisions and financial decisions, truthfully. Hard to do that. But in 2020 through 2022, there were a lot of emotions running high, and even like through 2024. But we had 2020, we had a COVID sell-off. We had the fear of the global economy shutting down, which it ultimately did. But we had this COVID sell-off, this abrupt sell-off, and then a quick recovery. Then we had another good year in the market of 2021, but then we had market valuations that were stretched. And it's like, can this continue? Stimulus is kind of starting to wane from COVID. And then in 2022, we had a triple bear market. Stocks were in bear market territory, bonds bear market, and then cash returning a negative yield adjusted for inflation. And then you have 2023, which kind of was on the heels of 2022. We had a 23% positive in the S&P 500, but so much fear that, okay, is the market overvalued? Is this going to continue? And then 2024, we had another positive 25%. And then in 2025, we had the fear of the election and, or 2024, I should say, fear of the election. And then 2025, new administration coming in and a lot of fear with tariffs. So, I did this episode obviously I think it was 2023. So we didn't have the 2024, 2025 stories yet. But I think if I were to kind of look at all of those as a whole, a lot has gone on in 5 years. A lot has gone on. Like, think back to COVID. Like, where were we in March of 2024? Or I'm sorry, where were we in March of 2020? Or where were you in October of 2020? I mean, it was a different world. The market it looked totally different than it did today. AI had not hit mainstream at this point in time. And so I think the takeaway here is, if it bleeds, my mother-in-law loves to say this, if it bleeds, it leads. And the media does, in my opinion, and will continue to have one of the biggest influences on this Dalbar study, on investment behavior. And I know it's easier said than done, and hindsight's 2020, but if you can try to implement a process that's repeatable and unemotional, I like to call it DERP, discipline, unemotional, repeatable process, you're going to be set up for success long-term. If you can get help with that, maybe a third-party objective advisor, even better. Okay. But this is my opinion is why the Dalbar gap has been as wide as it is. 400 basis points is not insignificant over the course of 30 years. All right. Number 35, using a reverse mortgage as part of your retirement income strategy. So I had George Verbin, friend of mine who does reverse mortgages. I think my biggest takeaway here, and it's going to be similar to another episode takeaway here shortly, but home equity is honestly one of the largest assets for everyday retirees. I think for you PFR Nation that are listening to the podcast, it's probably not your largest assets, but it's probably one of the largest. You probably have a retirement account that's maybe larger, or maybe a brokerage account that's larger, but your home asset may be a very close second or third, or maybe it is your largest asset. Maybe you live out in Silicon Valley and your house is worth $4 million and you bought it for $100,000, whatever it is. So I would say is, instead of maximizing your legacy with this asset, you could tap into it for income if you need it, or use it as an emergency fund. The reverse mortgages, the HECM mortgages, they call them. they can be used like this. They don't have to be just used as a reverse mortgage income stream. It could be used as an emergency fund. And so don't be afraid to do that, especially if, maybe your retirement account balances are a little bit underfunded, like relative to your spending. It's okay to use some of your home equity as part of your retirement income strategy. And with these HECM mortgages, that allows you to do that, but also maintain residence inside of that home. So pretty powerful. I don't see it very popular in our practice, but it's certainly an option to consider if it makes sense for you. All right, number 36, asset location to improve tax efficiency in retirement. So I will simply reference Vanguard's Advisor Alpha study. We talked about this last episode, but asset location, what this means is you own the tax efficient investments in your taxable accounts because they're tax efficient. And then you own your tax inefficient investments in your tax deferred accounts because they're tax inefficient, but we don't care because you're not being taxed on that interest income or on those dividends or on those unrealized capital gains. So I think this makes sense is yes, you want to implement asset location as part of your strategy. So location, very similar to real estate. It's where your property is. With investments, it's where those tax inefficient investments live. But the default advice on this one, like if you actually put this in practice, that should mean you own no bonds in your taxable account. And the order of withdrawal for most retirees, when we crunch the numbers for them, is start with your taxable bucket first, then your tax deferred, and then your tax free. If you have no bonds in your taxable account and you go through a downturn, well, now you have sequence of returns risk and you can't sell any bonds because you don't have any in your brokerage. Where are you going to go? Are you going to then tap into your tax deferred that you were planning to defer or convert until RMD age? That could be a problem. And so I would say, yes, asset location adds value, but don't let the tax tail wag the dog. It's okay if you have some fixed income in your portfolio in your brokerage account that is taxable just to hedge against those early years of retirement where you could run into the dreaded sequence of returns risk. Okay, for those of you who are watching on video, you can see I lost the vest. I was in between meetings. I had to stop my recording for that first half of this episode. And the sun came out in Chattanooga, and I'm telling you, it just burns things up at about 4 p.m. So it's a little hot outside, and I'm sweating in here. So I took the vest off. But here we are. We are on number 37. 37 flexible withdrawal strategies to maximize spending during your lifetime. Well, you probably, if you've been following the podcast and watching the YouTube channel for all of this time, you know how I feel about the 4% rule. I think it's a great benchmark as a starting point to kind of get a pulse check. Hey, do I have enough? Or can we make this whole retirement plan thing work? You can literally use the back of a napkin. If you take your income gap or what you need to solve for your distribution from your portfolio, and you divide that income gap into your portfolio, you'll come up with a percentage. And if that percentage is around 4%, you're probably going to be just fine, because in the worst case scenario, according to Bill Bengen's research, the worst case scenario, a retiree retired in October of 1968, but their portfolio still lasted 33 years despite going through 2 bear markets and about a 5-year period and hyperinflation in the 70s and 80s. But there's so many factors in terms of why you shouldn't use the 4% rule for your own retirement plan. And, I think one of those factors is that you're very likely to underspend throughout the duration of your retirement if you use the 4% rule, based on the textbook definition, which is start with the 4% based on your portfolio value and then adjust each year by inflation every year thereafter. So you kind of throw out the percentage using the 4% rule. So if, let's say you have a $2 million portfolio, 4% is 80,000. You start with 80,000 in year one, and then year two, whatever inflation was that past year, then you increase your 80,000 by whatever the inflation was for that particular year. So it doesn't account for things like spending stages in retirement. So go years versus slow go years versus no go years, or this idea that retirees typically lag inflation by a full 1% on an average on an annual basis. But it also doesn't take into consideration other income sources and the timing of those income sources like Social Security. Okay. So I think there's an argument that yes, you can probably safely spend a lot more than 4%. Through that same research, Bill Gemengen came up with the fact that the average retiree in his research experienced a 7% starting withdrawal rate. So a lot higher than 4%. But if you fall 7% and then you get hit with a sequence of returns risks, like let's say the 2000s, so the lost decade, and we've done some back testing on these on the YouTube channel. If you're missing a YouTube channel, by the way, you need to dive into some of the back testing I've been doing on the Whiteboard Fireside Chat playlist. I think we've got maybe 6 or 7 episodes now that are strictly dedicated to back testing. Really from 1987 and beyond, because a lot of the research was done up until 1996, Bill Bengen's famous 4% rule. But anyways, if you do start with a high rate of withdrawal and you get hit with a market like early 2000s with a dot-com crash or the Great Recession of 2008, okay, or more recently, let's say the triple bear market in 2022, you might need to make some adjustments, okay? And so I think this idea of a flexible withdrawal strategy, I like it because you can start with a higher rate knowing that you can make some adjustments at some point in time. But I think you need to know what your needs are, what your income needs are, what your income wants are, and what your income wishes are. And you need to be comfortable going into retirement that, hey, if you run into some really bad times early on, this is what you need to cut your spending to. And ask yourself, is that doable? Okay, because yes, we can talk about all these flexible withdrawal strategies like using guardrails or spending stages or spending smile. But if you cannot come to the conclusion that you can cut your spending by X, that these strategies don't mean anything. Okay, so I'd recommend checking out that episode, learning a little bit more about some of the flexible withdrawal strategies, and then determine which one would apply to you. 38, leveraging legislative changes to maximize company retirement plan. So I think at a very high level in this one, I had Alex Jenkins on this. He is one of the executives or one of the higher up individuals at Nest Egg. It's a 401k plan administrator. And really the takeaway is Secure Act that passed in 2019. This was Secure Act 1.0. It was really the first legislative overhaul to retirement plans in several decades. And so I think the key takeaway is that a lot of business owners that I talk to, especially smaller business owners that may not have hundreds of employees, maybe they have 20, 30, 40, 50 employees. The assumption is that the 401k plans are so expensive to administer. That has completely changed with the Secure Act 1.0. And so I'd highly recommend, if you are a business owner or you're a decision maker at a closely held business, consult with a company like a Nest Eggs that specializes in medium size or even basically companies that are your size. Find a provider that specializes in companies your size to see where the opportunities are to provide a retirement plan that benefits you as the owner or the executive, but also some of the rank and file employees, but also minimizing costs and maximizing value. There are those opportunities now with Secure Act 1.0, so please take advantage of those. All right, number 39, this one, love this one, and this has been a theme for many conversations with our clients in our day-to-day practice is number 39. Are you getting too conservative too early before retirement? Love this one. Okay. So literally, I was just having a conversation with a new prospective client who is in a life cycle fund, a target fund. So this is a perfect example of why I like target funds as you're starting the accumulation process. It's simple. You have one fund and you invest in that one fund and it gives you a diversified allocation of all of the different asset classes that you may need or want, and more than you need or want. But what happens as the life cycle fund, as you get closer to that target year, okay, let's say it's 2030, you have a life cycle 2030. The closer you get to 2030, the more conservative your portfolio is going to become. And that may not jive well with your individual risk tolerance, your individual risk capacity, your individual income sources that you're going to have in retirement, your age, your life expectancy, the timing of Social Security, all of the things, all of the variables, taxes, all the variables that factor into designing a well thought out investment allocation. Life cycle funds don't do this. And I think this is kind of the theme I see in general for folks that are approaching retirement. They have this mindset that they want to get super conservative the closer that they get to the starting line, not the finish line. And this is a key distinction, that retirement doesn't mean you're done investing, or it really shouldn't mean you're done investing. Maybe you hit the lottery, or maybe you sold a business for 30 million and maybe you don't need to take on any risk. That's certainly a scenario where you could totally de-risk and get ultra conservative. But oftentimes the folks we serve that have $1 million to $5 million saved for retirement, they probably need to take on some risk, or they want to take on some risk to hedge against inflation and protect against longevity risk, protect against a need for long-term care at the end of their life, or leave a meaningful legacy to their children and grandchildren. You need to really dial into this and sort of, have a different mindset as you approach the starting line of retirement. Is that the starting line, you might still have a 30-year time horizon. Okay. Gone are the days where you retire at 65 and maybe if you're lucky, you live until 75. I think folks that are, I was just talking to this prospective client today. I think it was her grandmother lived until 106 years old. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know what you're going to be doing at 106 that, would feel like, hey, I want to live that long. But if you're fortunate enough, aging is a privilege. If you're fortunate enough to have longevity on your side, whether it's 106 or 90, you might have a 30-year or more time horizon to invest in retirement. So I think the idea there is come up with a global allocation that makes sense to you. And then what you want to do is look at your different buckets. You might have a taxable account or a taxable brokerage account. You might have some tax deferred buckets and you might have some tax free buckets. Coming up with the right makeup of each of those accounts to achieve your target allocation globally, but then each of those buckets aligning with the time horizon and when you start withdrawals on each of those buckets. That's how you can kind of massage and manipulate some of the sequence of returns risk or hedge against some of the sequence of returns risk that many people are afraid of. So kind of thinking about where do you own those equities? Where do you own those bonds? Kind of similar theme of the asset location from a tax standpoint. But again, this is kind of this theme of don't fall into the trap. Don't fall into the trap that you need to get ultra conservative when at the starting line of retirement. That is a very, very dated mindset and approach to planning for retirement. Number 40, what this election means for your investment portfolio. Nothing. Next one. Just kidding. This one is, it's a touchy one. Not going to lie. And I kind of, was joking when I said, let's skip this one, but, every election cycle, generally the presidential election, brings about a lot of emotions for, with investors. Okay. And we hear that as advisors. I hear that as advisors. 2016 was kind of the first one. I was like, ooh, this is a real thing. Because 2008, I just started in the industry, so the election was, it was pretty much over. It was over when I was in training. So that was 2008. 2012, didn't really feel like I was fielding the same kinds of questions that I was in 2016. 2016, when Trump came onto the ticket, it was, it changed the game in terms of politics for better or for worse, depending on how you feel about how Trump is performing. But I think the idea here is that emotions run really high. 2016, think about 2020, 2024. So, and I think this is going to be a thing. This is going to continue because I think the social media algorithm is picking up the fact that people get really angry about politics. People get really fired up about politics. So what does the algorithm do? They feed more content related to politics to all of us, the consumers. We're the product, by the way. And I like to say this. If you're not paying for the product, you are the product. Social media, we are all the product. Okay. Unless you're a business owner and you have a social media platform and you're paying for ads, that's a different story. But in general, we're consuming the social media algorithm. We're the product, and it's going to push political propaganda at you because that's what performs well on social media. So know that and understand that most people, this is just my humble opinion, are kind of generally somewhere in the middle. Like maybe you lean a little bit to the left, maybe you lean a little bit to the right. Most people are not extreme right and extreme left. Okay. And most people don't want to hang out with those people anyways. Let's be honest with you. Right. So regardless of what your political beliefs are, I don't want to hang out with an extremist because they have all these conspiracy theories and they're constantly bringing up things that are probably not true, but they believe them to be true. But my point is this bleeds into investment decisions. And oftentimes this emotion can get in the way of good investment decisions. So my suggestion here, I guess the question I would ask is, are you investing in politicians or are you investing in corporations? My humble opinion is I'm investing in corporations. I'm investing in the great companies in the S&P 500, in the Russell 2000, in the international indices. Okay. I'm not investing in politicians. Certainly politicians can have an influence. Their legislative policies have an influence in those businesses. But I believe whatever Washington does, the great companies are going to find a way. If they have great leadership, they'll find a way to be profitable. Okay. Regardless of what the legislation says. Okay. And so my suggestion here is come up with a defined investment policy statement. Okay. Come up with a global allocation. Talking about that previous episode, come up with your global asset allocation and stick to that. So as the market moves, let's say stocks are rising, take some of the gains off the table. Stocks are falling, buy stocks. That's how you implement a disciplined, unemotional, repeatable process, is have an investment strategy for each bucket that you have. That way, when emotions run high, like in election cycles or like in bear markets or downturns, you have a plan, you have a process that does not involve your emotions. All right, number 41 and 42 are with Tim and Alexis Woodward. Love this couple. They are RIA owners, so fellow financial planning firm owners. I think in Indiana. They're in Indianapolis, Indiana. Great couple. They're married and they are a blended family. So Alexis is stepmom to Tim's two boys, and they are a beautiful family. Really nice couple. Very great at what they do. They're a financial planning firm, and they do accounting as well. They do tax preparation, and they specialize in working with business owners. But in this one, we broke it up into two parts, and we wanted to do an episode around blended family financial planning and retirement planning. This is something that's also near and dear to my heart. Having also grown up in a blended family, my wife, same thing, is also in a blended family with her mom and stepdad, and also her dad and stepmom. So she almost has two blended families as part of her picture. We broke it up into two parts. Blending and building wealth in a blended family. That's 41. And then 42 was wealth protection and transfer in a blended family. So, I would say on 41, the gist of it is this: 40% of marriages today will result in a blended family, which is really interesting, to me, is that 40% of marriages today will involve some child from a previous marriage or partnership or relationship. Okay. And I would just say it brings a lot of complexity to the table. It brings a lot of complexity into the picture. Even if you don't think there's complexity, there is complexity. I promise you this. Okay. And so 41 was about building and blending. I think the biggest takeaway I would say is have open communication. Like, talk about money, talk about finances before you get married, if possible. If you're already married and now you're a part of a blended family, it's never too late. It's better late than never, my mom loves to say. Have the conversation about finances and what the goals are, and what the priorities are, what the potential roadblocks might be within your family, because that will really help kind of frame up your retirement income plan, your investment strategy, and then ultimately your estate plan, which is number 42, wealth protection and transfer to blended family. This, in my opinion, is where the complexities really kick in. If you do this part wrong, you can destroy how you are remembered. You can destroy your legacy. All right. And I've seen this, unfortunately, with clients. I've seen it with friends. I think about a friend of mine who had a situation like this, where his mom got remarried, and he had, the new stepdad. He had adult children on his side, and my friend's mom obviously had adult children, two of them on her side, and she was sick with cancer for many years and ended up living 12 years with this cancer. But she had intended, at least this was based on her verbal conversations with my good friend, to help with education for her grandchildren, my friend and his brother's children. And so these were verbal conversations that were had, and I don't know what transpired. I wasn't their financial advisor. I wasn't their estate planning attorney. I wasn't in the room in those conversations. But what transpired is that she left all the assets to her husband. And it was done via will. It was not done via a trust. And so ultimately those assets are now his, and he can do whatever he wants with them. And his estate plan says all of his assets go to his two children, not the stepchildren, not his late wife's children. So he can obviously choose to make that decision. And there was no clause in her estate plan that said, hey, you need to carve out X amount for education for my grandkids, or you need to carve out X amount to my children. That would need to be done via some kind of living trust. And that was not put in place. And I don't know whose fault it is. I'm not going to put blame on anybody. But what I would say is, if you're part of a blended family, you've got estate planning challenges, whether you know it or not. So talking to an attorney and a financial advisor that is comfortable with blended family retirement planning and how that kind of marries into the estate plan, super important. And then I would go another step further, and kind of similar to what I said on episode 42, communication. Communicate the estate plan. Be upfront about it. Don't hide behind what you're doing, because they're going to find out one way or the other, whether it's during your lifetime or at your death. And if they find out at your death and you did not have conversations that might have been hard conversations, but useful conversations to have, how is that going to impact how you're remembered? And is that the way you want to be remembered? So that's all I'm going to say is communication. Have a plan, have a process, and then communicate that plan. You don't need to share the details. You don't need to say, here's how much we have in investments and here's how much I'm going to leave you. If you want to do that, to each their own, but no one's forcing you to tell them numbers, but tell them what your intentions are and why you put those provisions in place within your estate plan. That's it. Okay. Let's see. What are we at? Number 43. Oh, this is a goodie. Stop planning for a normal retirement age. Okay. For all of you out there who you work for jobs you love, you never want to retire. You're going to work until you die, right? So I would say I might be in that camp. I enjoy what I do. I love what I do. I love helping people approach the starting line of retirement, because there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of anxiety. I like curbing people's anxiety as they approach the starting line of retirement. And then more importantly, as they navigate the complexities of retirement, love helping people with that. So I might say, you know what, this is me. But 40% of folks retired before they had planned to retire. Okay. In other words, they were planning to work a certain period of time, but then 40% of the time they have to retire early for whatever reason. Most likely the reasons are health changes for them, or they're caring for a loved one. And those are usually unexpected events. So I would always recommend, if you're setting a target, if you want to work past a normal retirement age, or even to a normal retirement age, cut that by 2 or 3 or even 4 or 5 years. See how early you could retire. See when you could achieve financial independence and work optional. Or see when you can achieve coasting to retirement, meaning you don't have to save another dollar to get to retirement. You can't retire yet, but you don't need to save more for retirement. Calculate those ages, and I think that will serve you well, because if you're throwing a curveball and you have to retire earlier than you had planned, but you didn't think it through, that could cause a little anxiety. Okay, so think through that. Number 44, how much will I spend in retirement? I think this is a great question. One of the retirement planning projections that we need to solve for is, how much income do you need in retirement, right? So there are other variables like, what's your rate of return, or what's your, how long are you going to live? What is inflation going to be? What are healthcare costs? All of those are important variables that are going to impact your probability of success. But the baseline of what you're going to spend is so critical, and it makes such a difference in terms of the Monte Carlo analysis and whether or not you are going to be able to retire when you want to retire. Many people, professionals included, financial planners included, use 80% of after-tax income, because the assumption is you're saving 20. Okay, so you don't need 20. So you need 80, assuming you're spending the rest. And I think that's fine. I think that's okay to start as a baseline. But what I would say is, think about what expenses might be coming off the books. Is your mortgage going to be paid off at a certain point in time? Education for the kids, is that going to be gone? And then think about what expenses you might want to add. Luxury travel, bucket list travel, new home, second home, RV, golf membership, whatever that might be, additional travel, right? You're going to have more free time. Every day is Saturday in retirement. And so I generally find in the go-go year, sometimes retirees actually spend a little bit more than they were spending before retirement, just because they have more free time. They have more discretionary time at their disposal. So therefore they're spending more in their hobbies and activities. That's completely fine, because the go-go years don't last forever. At some point you're going to slow go, and then at some point you're going to no-go. All right. So it's okay if you're projecting in a little bit of a higher income need than 80%. I think 80% is a good baseline to start with, especially if you're just doing the back of the napkin. Can I retire? Use 80%, assuming you're saving 20 of after-tax income. But then think through some of those expenses that may not last forever. And then think about some of those expenses you may want to add for some of those goals early on in retirement. All right, number 45, should I invest in my company stock? Now, this really came from years of working with individuals who have company stock in their portfolio. This is so common. You work for an S&P 500 company, Fortune 500 company, and part of your compensation might be in the form of company stock, which is great. It's an incentive. You have buy-in to the company you're working for. I mean, it's a brilliant way for golden handcuffs, but also for motivation purposes. I think that's a brilliant way to go about compensation. But over time, I've seen, clients all of a sudden, if they don't solve for this, if they don't have a plan and a process, all of a sudden their hometown bias, not taking action on that concentrated position, all of a sudden 30, 40, 50, 60% of their net worth is in their company stock position. And, that's great if it worked out for you to get to retirement and achieve financial independence. That's great. But do you want to hang your hat on that one specific company for the next 20 to 30 years? Because, about the turnover of the S&P 500. Companies in the S&P 500 don't stay there forever. Okay. Now, I think even more recently over the last 20 years, it's been even more turnover because I think the adoption and how quickly technology has changed the world. So just because you're working for Google or Apple or Microsoft doesn't mean that's going to be the top dog over the next 20 or 30 years. So say thank you for the company stock, but have a process on an annual basis to reinvest, divest and reinvest, but using a tax efficient strategy. Okay. So have a process early and often because you don't want to be in that position. I promise you, we have some of these in the families we serve where they came to us and the problem's already there. The 50, 60, 70% of their balance sheet is in one company stock. And you know what? Now they're afraid to sell it because there's so much tax due. And, it's a tough conversation to have. It's tough to weigh the downside when you're just thinking about taxes. And so it's easier to take small bites of the apple along the way as opposed to waiting until the problem is too big to handle. All right. Number 46. Should I die with zero? Roberto, shout out to you on this one. Roberto read this book in 2024 and told all of our clients about it. We even did an episode about it, episode 46. I think my takeaway is the title of the book doesn't tell the whole story. Okay. Die with zero doesn't mean you literally die with no money in the bank. It just, for me, it's utility. The utility of money is different based on your age. Okay. And I think also different based on your health too. I think just because you're a certain age doesn't mean health is on your side. You may be 55, but you may not have more than 2 or 3 years to live. Maybe you have a terminal diagnosis, right? But on the flip side, maybe you're 65 and you're great health. You might have another 25 years or maybe another 10 years in a go-go years. Okay. But I think the idea is that the utility of the money of money increases from when you're really young up until a certain point, usually when you're 40s and 50s, maybe in your 60s. And then it does start to decline because you can't do some of those bucket list trips and those experiences that you need physical health on your side to do later on in life. So I think using money when it's at its greatest utility for experiences and thinking of those expenses, not as expenses, but as experiences, investing in life experiences. It doesn't just have to be investing just for earning income. It could be investing for experiences and core memories for your family and your grandchildren. I mean, those, in my opinion, are investments. And don't be afraid to say, you know what, I'm going to spend some money on today as an investment in experience. That was my biggest takeaway from Die with Zero. Number 47, should you relocate in retirement? Massive uptick, obviously, of retirees relocating, especially after 2020. It's always been there. Everyone retires to Florida or the cliche states. But after 2020, it's just like completely accelerated. Okay. And some good, some bad. But I think my caution is this. You don't have to buy your dream home right away. Like you can try a place out first and get a feel for the neighborhood, get a feel for the town, get a feel for if it's the right place that you want to be over the next 25 to 30 years. Because once you build or buy your dream retirement home, it's tough to just want to get out of it. It's like you're going to be emotionally attached to that home. But if you hate the area you're living in and you didn't experience that before you bought or built a house, shame on you. And so my recommendation, I know it's never fun to move twice. We just did it here in Chattanooga. We moved from Florida to Chattanooga, rented a house for a year. Now we bought a house. Yeah, it was painful, but I'm very happy we did that because we would have never found this neighborhood, never would have, figured out, hey, this is the best area in Chattanooga. So that would be my recommendation. My caution on that one is you don't have to go sight unseen. You don't have to buy your dream home right away. All right. 3 more here. Downsizing to retire early. I think the theme in here is kind of like what I was talking about with the reverse mortgage. You can use that home equity to unlock the ability to fund part of your retirement. All right. And so, this is the perfect scenario. If you're retiring from an expensive state like in New York or New Jersey or California, to move into a lower cost of living area, there could be opportunities to basically replace or even upgrade your home for a lower cost. And you can use that equity to essentially, kind of deploy as part of your retirement income plan. I think this is a great way to accelerate and be in a position to potentially retire earlier than you otherwise would have. But again, going back to number 47 in terms of relocation, be cautious. You can rent, you can go vacation for a prolonged period of time, get a feel for those areas before you move, because you don't know how many times we saw the halfback scenario. Someone retires down to Florida and then they move halfway back somewhere in the Carolinas because Florida wasn't their cup of tea, or they move to Texas and they, this isn't really our style. We're going to go to Arizona, or they go to Las Vegas. I'm going to go to Florida. So it's okay if you move in retirement a couple of times. You don't need to be locked in and set in stone with one area at the beginning and for the rest of your life. All right, number 49, the volume 1. This is our first whiteboard retirement plan. Love doing these little case studies on the whiteboard. This was, I retired with 1.5 million, invested at 65. And we talked about withdrawal rates, spending phases, Roth conversion, Social Security timing. Truthfully, I would just check that episode out. I think this is a great episode for anybody who's planning for retirement, just to get a sense of like, what are some of those things and some of those levers you can pull as you approach retirement? I guess my takeaway on this one, this is the one I wrote down, is just, you don't have to use one Social Security claiming strategy for both spouses if you're married and you have that option. Like, you can leverage a combination. You can take one early and delay one until 70. Okay. You can kind of look at that higher Social Security benefit. I think this is what we did in that case study, is we said, one spouse had the higher benefit. That one we delayed until 70 to maximize that survivor benefit. And the other one we claimed a little early. I couldn't remember the exact timing there, but go check that episode out. I think it's a good one. All right, number 50, the 50 truths retirees wish they knew before firing their bosses. Again, I would just shameless plug, I should say. Go back and listen to this episode. I thought this was actually our top downloaded episode for a long time. And then this year we just started to pick up steam, and now we have a bunch of episodes that are way higher than that. But a lot of you are new, probably didn't listen to episode 50. And I think this is a good one because I talked about 50 truths that folks that we talk to in retirement, or whether they're clients or prospective clients, or just people that I talk about retirement planning with. These are 50 truths people wish they knew before they fire their boss. So check that one out. We also had a free PDF giveaway with all of the 50 listed in a PDF format. So check that one out. I don't even know if I had like a takeaway in addition to that, but that's it for today. So listen, if you are over 50 and you've done a good job saving to get to this point, and now you're looking to fire your boss, looking to retire, make work optional, and maximize your retirement income, minimize your lifetime tax bill, and worry less about money, follow the podcast. Share this podcast with someone else who is what I like to call PFR Nation caliber. Share this with someone else who's in a similar boat. And then also subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're doing a lot of content there as well on a weekly basis related to retirement planning. So if you've been listening for a while, you're finding our content useful, thank you for the support. Leave that 5-star review. We need to bump those reviews up a little bit, ladies and gents. Come on, let's bump those 5-star reviews up. That helps us make more of an impact and the people out there that are in that PFR Nation sweet spot. So thank you so much for your support. And then listen, last but not least, if you're planning for retirement alone, or maybe you're working with someone, you're like, I need a fresh set of eyes. I need someone who specializes in this whole retirement thing. This is what we do day in and day out. And we love to hear from you. We love working with listeners. So if you are interested in learning more about working with our firm, go to our website, imaginefinancialsecurity.com. Or you can just start with the retirement readiness questionnaire that is linked in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you, learn a little bit more about what you're looking to accomplish, and see how we can help you plan for and execute a successful retirement. Thanks so much for everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next week, part 3 on this little series. I'm enjoying this one. This has been fun. So I hope you guys are enjoying it too. And in the meantime, everyone have a great week. Take care.